I bet you thought I would have forgotten, huh? Don't worry, I didn't. Like I said, I don't plan on blueballing you for like years on end, with the, false promise of a part 2. Because I did plan on making a part 2. And I thought it's no better time than now to pretty much just kind of make it. After all, I've pretty much just been on this weird binge of just like watching like different people go over different internet ARGs, which honestly, those have also piqued my interest, and who knows, maybe I'll make a video on some of those at some point in the future once I'm done with the Petscop series. But with this kind of renewed motivation, if you will, I believe it is now time for me to come back and finally go through at least the next few parts of the entire Petscop series. Like I said, the entire series is genuinely so long that if I were to try and make one entire just comprehensive video involving absolutely every single Petscop video, the entire series would probably be like several hours long. And if I'm going to be completely honest, and I think you can definitely agree with me on this, I don't think there's really that many people in my audience that would be willing to sit through a multi-hour long video from me. So, I mean, I think it's just best I cut it into parts and hope for the best. But hey, with that out of the way, let's just move on to the rest of Petscop, shall we? Petscop 6 was uploaded on April 20th, 2017, with no description. The video itself starts off with the windmill view from a few videos back. Video itself starts off with the view of the windmill alongside with the two thunderous tones that the last sightseeing of the windmill kind of ended with. Pretty much after the tones end, there is a time skip of 2 hours and 39 minutes. And once that kind of screen goes over, it pretty much cuts to the windmill again. But this time, after about like 10 seconds or so, the windmill blades go from going clockwise to going counterclockwise. And it just kind of stays on that for a few seconds. Shortly after this, there is this black shadowy figure that kind of emerges from behind the windmill itself and kind of wanders around in front of this like viewport, pretty much. I guess just like inspecting it and seeing what, you know, they can do with it, I guess. The camera that is viewing the windmill itself eventually kind of pans over to the other side, which is just, well, it's just more of the field itself. Pretty much after it pans over to the other side, there's just suddenly just like this image of just like this pink background with like a black like circle just like in the middle. Personally, I don't exactly know what it's there for. It's just kind of like it's just kind of there. Like there's not much else I can really say other than just like it's just kind of there for a few seconds, just no audio, and then it just cuts back to the game. I don't know if it was put there as like a way to like, you know, unsettle the viewer, or if there is something more to it. There might be something more to it, which I might go into in a later video, maybe like at the last video where I kind of give my own opinion on what the entire series is about. But as of right now, it just kind of appears there, and it's just never mentioned ever again. But after this sudden flashing of the screen, the figure starts wandering around, and this figure starts asking questions using these different letter blocks. The first question is, "Where is my house?" And shortly after this question is fully formed, this kind of like small green shack just starts like building itself like behind the figure, and, you know, that's just kind of what happens. Shortly after this, everything starts deconstructing itself, and these different objects kind of start appearing around the screen, such as the gift box, a pair of farming tools for some reason. It eventually stops on Toneth the bird, and it just kind of stays there as the figure starts asking the next question, which is, "Where's the school?" Same as last time, as soon as the question is finished being asked, another building starts like forming itself in the background, and this one just like is a red brick building, possibly being like part of the school itself. It also just entombs Tonith for like a short amount of time, which I don't know, personally, I just kind of find that really funny in my opinion. But once again, everything deconstructs itself. Tonith just kind of stays there as the figure just kind of, you know, resets all the different colored blocks and then changes these questions to a statement, and the statement being, I will follow. And afterwards, the camera then pans back over to the view of the windmill, and it stays on that for a few seconds before another time skip happens. This one lasting for about an hour and 24 minutes. And once it cuts back to the game, the windmill just kind of abruptly vanishes after like about 10 seconds or so. And pretty much after this, there is suddenly a cut to Paul being in the viewing room with the tool, and Paul just kind of goes on this kind of really funny and relatable tangent where he's just kind of like, yeah, it's gonna be real fun going through several hours of footage just to figure out when, you know, things actually happen.
It's kind of fun, actually. Going through a 4-hour video and noticing that on one half of the video, the windmill's going in one direction, and in the other half, it's going in the other direction. And pinpointing where the change occurred, and the fuck is this?
And, I mean, let's just put it this way, that's kind of almost like my entire style of editing. So, you know, I feel you there, Paul. It really fucking sucks. But as he's going on this tangent, he then goes upstairs to the grassy plain, in which he kind of wanders around, finds the windmill to just be inexplicably gone, and then he goes over to the camera, and the camera has changed from being a black color to now being this dim red. Pretty much just, you know, I guess symbolizing the fact that it's just kind of been messed with, and that's just the long and short of it. He then walks over to the other side, in which he finds a different colored block saying, I will follow, but of course this time they're in reverse. And of course Tonith just still standing there, in which he is able to catch it, and, you know, personally I kind of find this kind of like a very, like, eerie point more than anything, because the thing is that the jingle for when you catch a pet still plays, but there's like no music, there's nothing in the background, there's just this weird ambience just in the background, there's nothing happening, yet you still hear this very cheery, hey, you caught this pet finally. Remember when this game used to be about trying to capture pets like it's some sort of weird version of Pokemon? Yeah, those were some simpler times, weren't they? But of course, after he catches Tonith, he decides to go into the, I guess, like, you know, list of pets that he's captured, and decides to inspect Tonith, in which initially it just opens up with a placeholder description just saying insert description here or something like that, but then it suddenly just devolves on the next page to it just being random ramblings of, like, just someone talking about, like, you know, like, birds and whatnot, and forgetting what birds are, and then the topic suddenly just quickly changes to a painting puzzle for some reason. And then there's just this very long tangent that involves the story of a dog that apparently got hit by a car and broke its leg and survived. And this story itself, at least this beginning part of the overall story, I guess, is so long, apparently, that it just goes past the text box and, like, past the screen itself. You can't even read the entire thing because it just goes off screen and nothing else can be read. And then the page afterwards, it says, when that dog wags its tail and it appears happy, it's not real. Which, I mean, kind of a dark way to kind of conclude, you know, what I kind of found was just like a really funny case of just fucking software gore just suddenly happening right in front of us. And then the last page of the description, it just simply, you know, says, I guess this was Tonith, and then it just repeats the name of this creature just over and over again, and Paul is just very clearly confused as to what in the actual fresh hell he just witnessed. And I guarantee you, most of you, especially with the footage, you're probably just as confused as the rest of us. Paul then scrolls into the last page of the pets, in which there's 4 different slots that are there. The first 3 slots have a silhouette on them, and then the last slot is just completely empty with nothing in it. All of them have question marks over them, basically just denoting that they haven't even been caught yet. And Paul pretty much, confirms and, makes a note that the 3 shadowed pets on this last page pretty much bear a resemblance to the states of care being A, B, and NLM. It then cuts to Paul walking into the building where the tool is, and he decides to ask a few questions to the tool this time now that he has some new material to work with. The first question that he asks is, "Where is my house?" Tool then just responds with, "You'll never go home," which is, a little weird. And then Paul decides to ask, "Where is the school?" In which Tool then responds with, "You can't go back in time." Pretty much as the video wraps up, Paul just kind of gives his own thoughts on it. I'll let those play right now.
This game is trying very hard to make it seem like there's an entity in it. Like a ghost or an AI trying to communicate with me. It's interesting, but the way you know that there's a ghost in a game trying to communicate with you is if it comes out, if it stops being distant, and it comes out and you can have a real-time back and forth with it. And it stops being so one way. Like I leave my PlayStation and it comes out and does this whole pre-recorded thing. And well, the closest thing that's happened to that is last video. It actually answers my questions, but it only responded to 2 of my questions, and the first question I asked, I didn't even answer that question. So no obvious interactivity happening. And it answered the second question, but that could have been a coincidence. Yeah. So, not entirely convincing yet. But, I'm looking forward to what I might see next. It's very interesting, this game, because you can walk around and something will just happen, Because I created a new file, and I tried to be scientific about it. I went and did all the same things that I did this time, and the same things did not happen. None of the things happened. None of the oddities occurred. Like the thing in the mirror room, for example. So there's a bit of randomness in it, and it's interesting how it doesn't seem to really care if you see everything, I guess.
And pretty much after that, the video comes to a close. Petscop 2 was uploaded on April 29th, 2017, with no description. It starts off with Paul back in the quitter's room, running back and forth between the bookshelf in order to try and repeat the weird event that caused the reflection to just kind of lag behind Paul. And pretty much after trying that for a few seconds, he decides to just go towards the other side of the room and stand in the corner while he, I assume, looks around through his notes or something like that, because there's the sound of rustling paper in the background. But while he's doing that, there's suddenly just this weird jingle that just starts playing on the other end of the room, and obviously Paul goes to investigate. What ended up happening is that suddenly the reflection just vanished, just into thin air, and once the jingle ends, the reflection reappears to Paul's surprise.
Hi there.
He kind of sees this and then tries to see if it will allow him to repeat the event that happened when he went behind the bookshelf, but once again, it doesn't happen again, and it just seems to just be a one-time thing from now on. He then goes back into the corner, seemingly originally to try and see if he can get the reflection to disappear again, but something else ends up catching his attention, and that is something new with the note that is on the other end of the room. And on that note, it reads, "Come here," in bright pink block letters, which pretty much implies that it's the pink tool basically saying, "Get back here." So the video then cuts over to him going into the building where the tool is, and, well, of course, the pink tool is there, and there's already a message that's orbiting around the tool. The message that is orbiting around the pink tool reads, "I love you, new maker, please show Marvin where his house is." Basically solidifying the fact that the weird shadowy figure that we saw in the last video was indeed this Marvin character. So now we at least have a name for this thing and I can stop calling it the shadowy figure. So Paul decides to use this opportunity to ask this mysterious pink tool a few questions, the first being, "Who are you?" And the tool, in typical fashion with whenever the pink tool takes over, it completely ignores the question and just continues on with whatever it is that's trying to say, and it just simply responds with, "Go there and he'll follow you, his daughter is there." So Paul tries to ask the "remember being born" question, and then the tool just simply responds, once again ignoring the question, saying, "Also wants 1,000 pieces for a machine beyond school basement stairway." Yeah, the pink tool isn't going to say shit, let's just put it that way. Pretty much shortly after that message appears, the red tool reappears, and that's basically about it. Paul then goes back to the building where you can like input a face and like a different room can appear. He kind of stands in front of like the turnstile kind of thing where something could possibly be put in, and he goes into his pets menu and tries to see if he can like jam a pet in there or something like that, but it just simply pulls up the same error message over and over and over again saying child library accepts people. So at least we have yet another confirmed name for this one specific building. It's called the child library. I don't know if that was already mentioned beforehand, or if I just suddenly forgot as I'm recording this. It's quite possible that the name of it was already mentioned and I'm just an idiot. Paul decides to enter the child library and input Kara's face, but this time it is Kara's face with specifically Mike's eyebrows, which initially he doesn't notice that they are actually Mike's eyebrows, but he does in fact make a note of it that that just so happened to be the eyebrows that he selected, and he makes note of that. And once the room is generated, he walks in, and the entire room is just like purple and black and shit like that. Fucking missing texture-ass room. And on the table, there's two objects. There's a stack of letter blocks, and another object that has been obscured by a black sensor box. And whatever this object is, this completely just like redacted object that was apparently there, whatever it was, it seems to have shaken Paul, because there's like a cut shortly after he zooms in onto the table and like the tone of his voice is like changed and he's like stuttering a lot more than usual.
So this is Kara with eyebrows. I put Mike's eyebrows on her. I could have put other eyebrows on her, but I didn't. I put Mike's on her.
So whatever was there, it was not something that he expected to see, and it was something that possibly unsettled him for one reason or another. And pretty much after that, there is a screen afterwards from, I'm assuming, the editors or whatever, with a message that basically says that this object was censored for an unknown reason, potentially meaning that it was censored before it was kind of like, I guess, sent to them, because obviously, as we already know, these videos on the Petscop channel were, I guess, originally intended for one specific individual, so it is possible that Paul himself redacted these objects beforehand when he initially intended to send it to this other individual, which personally just kind of raises even more questions, because why would he censor an object before sending it to someone as evidence that he's found something weird? Unless it was something that was genuinely that, like, unnerving that it would just, like, mess with them both. I mean, anyone's guess is as good as mine, if I'm going to be completely honest. It then states, like, a few more objects that are going to be censored in the future. I'll leave that on screen for you if you want to read through that. And obviously I'll mention those when we actually get to them. And then, pretty much after that, the video comes to a close, and that is Petscop 7. Petscop 8 was uploaded on May 9th, 2017, with no description. This is one of the shorter ones, going on for only about like 4 minutes. The video starts off with Paul back at the road, running back and forth across the road for a little bit, and he kind of notices like something a bit off with the timing of the cars that actually go, down the road itself. He stops at the tunnel for a little bit and then steps off of the road, and he begins to pretty much just take note that the cars just seem to just stop coming at all whenever he's on the road. And he kind of just repeats, doing this for a little bit before suddenly, instead of a car coming down the road, we instead see Marvin running down the road, stopping about halfway. And of course, even though Paul is confused, he decides to follow Marvin, in which Marvin essentially leads him back to where all the different paintings of the different buildings were. And Marvin first stops at the picture of the brick building, which now we know is the school. After Paul inspects the painting, Marvin is seen just kind of running around in circles for a little bit before continuing onwards to the next picture, which is, of course, the house. And the same thing pretty much happens. Paul inspects the picture, Marvin runs around in circles for a little bit, and then continues on. But instead of moving on to the windmill picture, Marvin just kind of suddenly just takes a sharp left into the wall and just kind of runs up against it a few times, and then runs around in circles again, and then runs into the wall again for a little bit longer before just running away upwards. Not just back the way that they came in from, just straight up apparently running upwards into the dark. Of course, Paul is very confused by this, so he decides to follow Marvin up onto the, upstairs grass plain to see if he can actually find Marvin, which, he can't. He just kind of wanders around for a little bit, can't find Marvin, and it pretty much just cuts back to him, back to where Marvin ended up getting stuck at the wall. And he tries to see if there's something behind the wall or something along those lines, but there really isn't anything. But as he's doing this, he also is apparently talking to someone in the background, and we can't exactly hear the other person, so I am assuming that this is probably him talking to a friend or someone that he knows over the phone, which is why we can't exactly hear the other party that he's talking to. But apparently he's just asking questions and trying to figure out where this person found I guess something in that same area at some point.
Yeah, well, the thing is, it's not here now. There's not even a passageway or anything. Can you remember when you saw this? Well, it could have changed between then and 2004. After 2004, my mom had it reportedly. Well, okay. Thanks.
And there is also another note of the fact that apparently Paul's mother had this game in the past before Paul ended up getting his hands on it. So there's also that. But pretty much after that conversation ends, the video itself ends. Petscop 9 was uploaded on May 24th, 2017 with no description. This is one of the longer ones, so prepare yourself. The video itself starts back at the title screen, but this time there isn't really any music to accompany it. It kind of stays on the title screen for a little bit before it suddenly loads up some demo footage of a player back over at Even Care. Now, for those that don't exactly know what demo footage exactly is, it's pretty much, I don't know exactly how common it is nowadays with modern games, but it's kind of it's kind of like the early days of screen recording pretty much, except instead of it just being a straight up screen recording, it's basically kind of the game kind of reconstructing the data of inputs and stuff like that in order to kind of repeat the steps that were taken while it was recording this data, it's a lot more in depth, and it's also something that is commonly used when testing games like that. So that way they can go back through and, repeat whatever steps were taken in case they ran into like a bug or some sort of like serious game-breaking issue or something along those lines. That's kind of what it is. Loads of demo footage of the player back at even care. The player just kind of wanders around for a little bit, makes its way over to the treadmill room, and instead of it being a treadmill and the piano is completely absent. The player runs on the treadmill and kind of like rewinds the numbers and whatnot, and every, I guess, like, even number is a bright pink, while every odd number is like a kind of like a deeper purple almost, or like a violet or something. I don't know. It's not quite red per se, but it's like a darker pink. I don't know colors, man. Okay, I'm sorry. One thing I did in fact notice while I was watching this is that the timing of these numbers going down is actually perfectly in time with Paul's actions of plucking the petals of the flower, a few videos back. I'm actually going to quickly play those two clips side by side so that way you can kind of understand what I'm saying here.
Wait.
And trust me when I say this, this is far from the first instance where something like this happens, where there is going to be like repeated steps happening in different parts. And this is also the start of where there is kind of like an established link between the new maker plane and the gift plane itself. Pretty much once the demo player kind of reaches 0, the footage just eventually stops and the video cuts back to Paul in the new maker plane. Paul explores the backyard area where Care was beforehand, and he kind of is like running up and down like the stairway to where Care was. And he kind of stops at a specific point. He finds like a specific point, and he decides to instead take a right. And once he does so, he kind of just clips through the wall and becomes a silhouette instead of just being fully colored. This is pretty much obviously in reference to the first part of the note from the first video, which was, something about like, going down the stairs, and instead of, continuing onwards, you turned right and you became like a shadow monster, something like that. That's kind of what this is. It's kind of like alluding back to that, but this, even though at first it appears like some sort of weird glitch, it actually serves a purpose, surprisingly enough. So of course, Paul kind of repeats this a couple times because he finds out that upon returning into that stairwell, he kind of returns to normal. So he kind of repeats that, trying to find the actual point in which the game allows him to do this. So he just kind of does that for a little bit before he decides to go back upstairs to the flat grass area as this shadow form of himself, and he runs back up to where the windmill was, and he finds that the windmill is now back to where it's supposed to be, instead of it just being a base plate of where it was. Now, Paul does in fact find an entrance into the windmill, and inside there is just a small room. There is a sign with another face on it, this one with no eyebrows, presumably being like another form of Care's face, possibly. And there is a white tool on the other side, and in the middle there is this gear mechanism that is seemingly clogged with gifts. Paul finds that he can interact with the white tool, and upon interacting with it, the white tool kind of moves over to the gear mechanism, the screen goes black, and Paul gains 50 gifts. And after the screen returns, there's this low rumbling tone that plays, and the gear mechanism is all cleared out and whatnot. It's not shaking violently anymore. Paul then returns back to the child library, and he inputs the new face that he had found, and upon doing so, a message appears saying, "You found her. You may visit her room." Now, upon the room actually generating, the room itself is completely white. There is no child that's in there. And there is also, for some reason, a copy of Paul's character on the other end of the room staring at a note that's on the wall. So on the table, there is a small version of the red tool and a miniature windmill, and the note itself reads as follows. "You must have guessed, but I was looking through your things. I found a picture of you from 1977 standing in front of an old windmill with your friend. You went there, and it was a bad idea. Your friend and the windmill both disappeared into thin air. Her sister was holding the camera. She took another picture minutes later, just you, no windmill, and no friend. You married her sister, and years later, your friend was reborn as your daughter. Your wife won't admit that this is true, but I know it, because I found the evidence. Your friend never returned with you, and the windmill was gone. I went to see it myself. Where is it? What did you do? Signed, Rainer Newmaker." So here we have another new character being introduced. Maybe it's a new character. Again, I probably have to watch through my part 1 in order to try and remember if this name was actually brought up during the first 5 episodes, but I have no idea. But to me, as of recording this is a new character that we're being introduced to that goes by the name of Rainer. Now, Paul then exits the room, and the loading screen as he leaves just is a blue party hat gift. Now, the moment that the next area loads, instead of spitting him back out into the entrance of the child library, it instead brings him to a completely new area, where it's just a straightforward path going down the middle of some sort of weird park area. The path itself ultimately leads to this spot that has a cake and 2 gift boxes on it, and at the far end there's also like this window that has like a park bench and like a pinwheel and a slice of cake just sitting on that park bench. As of right now, I don't know why that's there. The cake itself has a candle with the letter that is shaped into the letter P, and the 2 gift boxes are just very slightly different. The one that is on the left has a sticker on it, while the one on the right doesn't. Paul first opens the unlabeled box, and when the box actually opens, there's a green key that emerges out of it that starts floating above Paul's head. Paul then goes over to the other gift box, and the moment that it opens, whatever emerges from it is redacted. This is the second object that has been stated that was stated to be just like censored for one reason or another. But whatever it is, much like the last thing that was redacted, it seems to have startled Paul in some way, and he's confused as to why it's there, and it kind of shakes him up a little bit.
What the fuck?
It then cuts over to Paul kind of, I guess, just like showing that after opening up that gift box, it kind of messed with the camera or something like that. But he tries to move on from that, and he goes on to explore around the side areas of this park. And at first there doesn't seem to be anything, but then he ends up finding like the secret passageway that leads into a room with a third gift box. And upon opening up this gift box, instead of something popping out from it, the in-game camera suddenly just like zooms in over the box itself and then dives right in. And the screen is just black, and there's like a choir that's just like singing in the background for like a solid like 10 seconds. Once that entire event comes to a close, Paul finds himself back up onto the grass plain, but this time he is pretty much like right out in front of like this small brick structure with an open door, and above that open door there is a white cube with a symbol on it. Upon going through the door, it ends up spitting him back up to Even Care, and Even Care has some new music now, which is actually pretty cool. Now, he kind of wanders around, and he interacts with some of the different objects that he was able to, and there isn't really much that has changed outside of one of these signs in the hallway. Instead of it reading as, you know, when you're looking for a pet, find somebody that you like. It has now been changed to when looking for a pet, find one that you like. It's a weird change, but it's a weird change, and you probably won't immediately notice it upon, like, your first playthrough, because he just, like, skips past it. But, you know, once you notice it, it's just something that you have to take a note of, because, I mean, it's something. Again, I'm not entirely sure why the change even happened. Paul eventually makes his way into the treadmill room, much like the demo footage showed at the beginning, and the treadmill itself still displays a 0 on it. Paul wanders around collecting the gifts before going onto the treadmill, and he reverses the treadmill until it goes back up to, I think it was like 16, which is about as high as it goes. He then just stays on that for a little bit before walking backwards on the treadmill and reducing the number until it reaches -1. And once he does this, the game freezes and then spits him back out onto the New Maker plane. He then ends up finding Care back down into that weird, like, basement area, and Care is no longer all messed up and glitched on the ground, and he's actually now able to catch, Care. Of course, this form of Care is in this NLM state. Paul inspects Care NLM, and the description reads as follows. Care NLM escaped from the school's basement and wandered the New Maker plane for days. To catch her, you had to lie, but it may not be a lie forever. You're the New Maker. You can turn Care NLM into Care A and close the loop. Again, a very interesting thing to state, and it kind of ties into my own overall theory about Petscop, but again, that will probably come in the last part of this entire analysis series, so sorry, I'm gonna have to keep you waiting on that one. So after reading the description, the video cuts back to Paul going into the child library, and he stands out in front with the weird receptacle. He selects Care NLM, and the library ends up accepting Care NLM. A message appears when he does this stating, "You've decided to leave Care NLM. If you change your mind within 6 months, you can take Care NLM back." What month is it anyway? What year is it? Of course, Paul seems to immediately regret this decision, so he decides to input the face of Care's room, runs into Care's room, and then decides to recapture her. And after that, the video comes to a close. Petscop 10 was uploaded on May 31st, 2017 with no description. This one is one of the shorter ones, running at only about like 4.5 minutes. The video itself starts with Paul back at Even Care. This time he goes into Amber's room. He decides to open up both of the gates to Amber's room and attempts to leave, but in the hallway, the door at the other end of the hallway just kind of closes in front of him, and the game freezes and spits him back into the title screen. Of course, Paul decides to go back into the game, and he ends up showing that all 3 of his saves are now currently in use. There is, of course, his main save, named after him, and then there's 2 more saves, one named Test, and the last one named Backup. The Backup and the Paul save are labeled with Panic SV, Possible Corruption. Again, this is another thing that apparently happened a lot, especially in older games, and that was panic saves. It's essentially mainly a thing that's normally used by game developers themselves whenever they're testing the game, and if they end up encountering something that would, like, I guess, break the game or corrupt something, a panic save would just kind of be put in place as a way to restore the game session back to a more stable state, instead of it just being completely unusable. So obviously, these new saves were likely Paul going through the game and testing out a few different things in order to see if the same things would happen again, and I think in future videos that will obviously end up coming up. So of course, Paul selects his main save, spitting him back out into the room with the hidden gift box. So he goes into the gift box, it spits him back into Even Care. He goes back into Amber's room and finds that both of the gates are still open. So the video then cuts to Paul back in the New Maker plane, and he ends up finding a new passageway that apparently leads him to the other side of the Quitter's room. And on this side, it's just pretty much all the same. The note itself is now, front to back, like it normally should be. On the bed, there is a cube that has a new symbol on it, and if you paid attention, that symbol is actually the same symbol that you see in the background when he was in Amber's room. Again, calling back to the fact that apparently this new maker plane and the gift plane are pretty much just kind of like interconnected in some way. So of course the reflection itself, that still exists. Obviously it's just now on the other side, and that's basically the only thing that ultimately has changed. Paul then returns to the tool and decides to ask a few new questions. So first he asks, what month is it? The tool responds by pulling down a red calendar object, which can't be interacted with, apparently. So nothing useful came out of that one. Paul then asks what year is it, and the response doesn't really change. Paul's third question, and the last question that he asks in this video, is where was the windmill? And whatever the tool responded with, it has been completely redacted, so we have no idea what in the hell the response even was, if there even was one. There really isn't even that much of a response from Paul, but it's probably safe to assume that his response to whatever it was is no different than his response to the other redacted imagery that we have encountered within the past few videos. But with that, Petscop 10 comes to a close. And there you have it. Petscop 6 through 10 gone through. Pretty much this is like the point in which like a lot of things start to get a little bit confusing. There's a lot of different elements that occur within this entire series that just kind of like happen, and they're all important in like their different ways, and it's very hard to explain. And trust me, even me going through this, I've gone through this series like quite a few times, and even still, just rewatching a lot of this footage is just... it is very strange, but it is a very, very interesting story in my personal opinion. Obviously, there's still a lot more. There's still like a good like 15 videos that we still need to go through, but trust me, I do plan to go through this entire series. And trust me, you're all in here for the long haul. So, with that out of the way, I'll see you guys in the next video. Have yourselves a nice day.